Hello, and welcome to Cascadia Speaks. Thank you all for being here. This is the second installment of the CascadiaNow webinar series, highlighting the distinct regional and cultural identity of the Cascadia region. You can view our previous Cascadia Speaks webinar on the CascadiaNow YouTube channel, and this video will be available there once today's event has concluded. Just to set you up so you can enjoy Cascadia Speaks. To the right of your screen, you see tabs for chat, and that will be useful over the next half an hour or so. Today's Q&A will begin mostly after the session, but Naomi might be throwing out some questions for you during her presentation, so please use that chat. I'll be monitoring it. Naomi will be able to glance at it, and we'll be able to know that you're here, that you're interested, or anything else that you want to hear about or know about today. So without further ado, let's get started. Cascadia Speaks, growing the impact of your awesome project with CascadiaNow Associate Director Naomi Botkin. Naomi grew up in Paulsbo, Washington. She values her citizenship of both Cascadia and the whole world. She holds a Master's of Public Administration from the UW Evans School of Public Affairs and a University of Washington certificate in fundraising management. And she's experienced in founding and managing nonprofit organizations. So today, Naomi is going to speak with us about the benefits of fiscal sponsorship and the impact that can have for your project. Do you have an awesome project or an idea for a project? Do you need some help with planning, fundraising, or publicity? And Naomi might have the answers here. So thank you for being here today, Naomi. Naomi, can you make sure your microphone's unmuted? Uh-oh, I apologize, everybody, for the technical difficulties. We had trouble testing stuff this morning, so we'll get it so that you'll be able to hear Naomi in just a moment. Thanks for your patience, everybody. We're gonna get it so that you'll be able to hear Naomi here.
Good morning.
We still can't hear Naomi, unfortunately.
Can you see me?
You are, yes, we can see you, Naomi, but we can't hear you. At the top of your screen, hopefully just make sure, I know you've got your camera on, so just if you make sure your microphone's unmuted at the top, it should not be red.
Got that.
Okay. And then I don't know why else we wouldn't be able to hear you. I'm sad.
Let's see, everyone, if I get close.
There you are. We can hear you now.
Oh, wonderful. And there's the animals can hear me too. Okay, everybody, I'm going to speak up to make sure my microphone is catching, but I think you can all hear me now, hopefully. Sounds great. Thanks so much for being here with us this morning. Happy winter solstice to everybody who's live with us. And if you're viewing this in the future as a recording, best wishes for whatever season you're celebrating as well. We're here today to talk about fiscal sponsorship. So what I'd like to do first off really quick is to ask everyone who's joining us to write me a little line as to what you think fiscal sponsorship is. Or if you don't know, tell me that you don't know. That's fine too. The term fiscal sponsorship is kind of wonky. And so I'm always curious to hear if people know what fiscal sponsorship means or whether they've even heard about it. So maybe this is your first time encountering the concept of fiscal sponsorship, and that's exciting too, because I think you'll like what you hear today. So I'm going to give you just a few seconds. Go ahead and type in a little line to let me know what you think fiscal sponsorship is, or if you've heard of it before. CascadiaNow is one of many fiscal sponsors across the United States. So today we're going to be talking a little more about what fiscal sponsorship is and how it can benefit awesome grassroots projects. So maybe you have a project you've been working on for a while. Maybe you have an idea for a brand new project and you could use a little help getting it off the ground and logistically organizing and reaching your goals for success. Let's see, I'm seeing now that hoping that fiscal sponsorship means finding someone to help give money to a project. I see financial support for mission-centric activities. And one myth that I'm going to dispel right away, and I hope I don't disappoint anyone, but fiscal sponsorship is not the same as financial sponsorship. And that's one thing that's kind of mystifying about the use of the word sponsorship, really. Fiscal sponsorship is actually more like administrative support for your project. Now, that doesn't mean that it doesn't include support for finding resources, because it definitely is very central to fiscal sponsorship that the sponsoring organization helps find resources for the sponsored project. So let's jump right in and talk a little bit more about what fiscal sponsorship is. As you all know, I'm on staff with CascadiaNow. And so the examples that I give today are going to be a lot in terms of CascadiaNow as a fiscal sponsor. But as I mentioned, there are lots of fiscal sponsors with different missions and different kinds of services that they offer. So we're going to explore that whole spectrum today. And hopefully you'll walk away with an idea of how to find the right fiscal sponsor to help grow the positive impacts of your awesome project. So in a nutshell, fiscal sponsorship involves one organization that is already a 501c3 organization and one group or project that usually does not have 501c3 status. And that organization, the sponsor, adopts that project to become one of its own programs. And by doing that, they extend their 501c3 status to that sponsored project. So just to dive a little bit more deeply in the concept of 501c3, what does that mean? A 501c3 organization is what the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, uses to designate a charitable or educational organization that is eligible for accepting tax-deductible donations. I get that maybe I'm a little quiet right now, so I'm going to lean in real snugly with this mic, and you guys are going to get real intimate with me today. So 501c3 purpose, as defined by the IRS, is an organizational project, a charitable project, scientific, anything that's furthering basically the general good of the general project, of the general public, excuse me, usually fits under the status of 501c3. And so a fiscally sponsored project is often one that is meeting those requirements for a 501c3 purpose, but really finds it a burden not only to apply for 501c3 status, but to carry on the regular compliance that's necessary, because there's accounting requirements, reporting requirements, legal requirements. There's a lot to keep up on to stay in compliance with the IRS as a 501c3. So, for example, with CascadiaNow, when a project comes to us and they would like to be considered for fiscal sponsorship, we discuss their activities and make sure they're in line with CascadiaNow's mission and with the 501c3 purpose generally. And then we discuss together what the relationship will look like and what kind of services they'd like to benefit from. We draft a contract that outlines what our relationship will look like. The CascadiaNow board of directors approves the project, and the project leaders themselves approve the contract. And once we've all signed it, that project comes on board as a project of CascadiaNow, and they benefit from our 501c3 status, as well as many other services that I'll outline a little bit more later. Now, there are actually many different kinds of fiscal sponsorship, and the one that I just outlined for you is called comprehensive fiscal sponsorship. That means that once we adopt the project under our 501c3 umbrella, that project is legally CascadiaNow. It has no separate legal existence as far as the IRS or the state of Washington or the state of Oregon or British Columbia, wherever you're located. The project itself is a program of CascadiaNow, as though CascadiaNow had gone out and started the project itself. So we leave creative control of the project in the hands of the project leaders. And there's a lot of trust involved in fiscal sponsorship on both sides, because we as the fiscal sponsor are liable for ensuring that the project stays 501c3 compliant. So we have to really believe that the project leaders have intentions and goals that are within the definition of what a 501c3 is. On the other end, the project itself is becoming legally a part of CascadiaNow. And so the project should really have confidence that its fiscal sponsor has good intentions and the ability to support the project in the ways that it needs. So fiscal sponsorship is a big trust relationship. And so I will encourage all of you, if you consider fiscal sponsorship, to make sure you really get to know your fiscal sponsor and feel comfortable with them before you sign a contract. I'm going to talk just a little bit now about why fiscal sponsorship is a thing, and where it came from, and why it cropped up in the first place. And it actually dates back to the 1950s, when the IRS first created the code around 501c3 organizations. The oldest fiscal sponsors cropped up way back then, and it wasn't very prevalent as a practice until the last 20 years or so, especially around issues where there's some kind of localized and immediate need. And actually, Hurricane Katrina just 10 years ago did a lot to further the cause of fiscal sponsorship, because all of a sudden there was an immediate need for relief and support in New Orleans, in the greater New Orleans area, and lots of grassroots projects or just community members coming together trying to help. And they had a lot of benefit that they could have had from 501c3 status, because they could have gotten tax deductible donations, applied for grants, been eligible for matching funds from employers. And rather than apply for that status themselves, which would have been a lengthy process, they reached out to current 501c3 organizations and asked for help and said, can you sponsor me? Can you take on our project? We want to do this and serve this unmet immediate need. And we can't do it on our own, but we don't have the time. This need is now, it's tomorrow, it's yesterday. So take us on and help us achieve our goals as a 501c3 organization. So these instances of a local immediate need in the last 20 years, sometimes it's been natural disasters, sometimes it's been disease, sometimes it's just a state of emergency around homelessness or hunger or different issues like that in a community. And so, whereas for a while, the IRS was actually kind of wary of fiscal sponsorship. Why are you, as a 501c3 organization, supporting these other projects instead of just doing your own work? But these instances of localized and immediate need have really brought fiscal sponsorship to the forefront as a very effective way for smaller grassroots projects that are clearly in line with the 501c3 purpose to get the support they need without having to go through the burden of applying for and then maintaining 501c3 status. So that's a little bit about where it comes from. It's also driven by the fact that there are around 2 million 501c3 organizations today in the United States that are active. And that's a lot for the IRS to keep an eye on, as you can imagine. And in more recent years, they're actually quite glad to see bigger organizations take on and support smaller projects instead of all of those individual projects having to get their own independent 501c3 status. So that's a little bit of background just on where fiscal sponsorship comes from as a practice. So I mentioned some of these benefits of 501c3 status that grassroots projects often miss out on. The big ones I already mentioned are that gifts from the general public that are charitable gifts can be tax deductible. A lot of times when a donor makes a gift, they're not looking for the tax deduction as their number one priority or reason for giving, but it still can put a donor's mind at ease, to be honest. They see the 501c3 designation, and to them that means that there is a level of accountability as well as transparency that this organization or project is following through with, and it really can make a donor feel confident about making a gift, and especially a large gift to a project or an organization. I mentioned grants and matching gifts, and I'll give an example. Actually, one project that we adopted earlier this year, already in just in its first few months in fiscal sponsorship relationship with us, they have received a $2,500 gift from a large employer who employs one of their board members. And because he volunteers on a very substantial basis with this project, he was able to submit those volunteer hours and actually get a matching gift from his employer for those volunteer hours at the rate of $25 an hour, which for 100 hours added up to $2,500. So this is this huge gift that they couldn't have had without 501c3 status. In the same way, a lot of employers will just match gifts one for one. So if someone makes a gift to your project and they work for an employer that matches gifts, you become eligible for that match. You also can apply for grants. And most, if not all, 99%, a huge amount of grant money that's set aside for charitable projects absolutely requires 501c3 status. And so it just opens this whole world of other funding sources that you can apply for. There's also a lot of administrative back end that supports your project. And this is maybe even the bread and butter of what fiscal sponsorship, is that rather than having to apply for 501c3 status, to report to the IRS, to keep your own books, the fiscal sponsor becomes an economy of scale for all of that stuff. So if Cascadia Now has 10 different projects that we're fiscally sponsoring, all of those projects appear on our annual reports to the IRS. We keep the books for all of those projects. We let them know how their financial position looks on a quarterly basis.
Naomi?
Yes.
Your microphone cut out on us again.
Okay.
So do you know how to adjust it to fix it? Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I think that I just need to be really snug in. So I'm sorry to be so close to the screen, but does this make it a little bit better?
Well, we can't, you didn't just get quieter, it just went away.
Altogether away. Okay.
So I don't know what you did to make it work before.
Oh, I'm getting from one attendee that he's been able to hear me he or she's been able to hear me the whole time. I'm going to just stay right up here and hope that you guys can hear me and power on through. Okay, so we were talking about the benefits of fiscal sponsorship, and that one of the big ones is that the administrative back end that a fiscal sponsor offers. That means that while the project leaders are in charge of the creative control of the project and making sure that the activities happen and are coordinated, the sponsor is going to be the one keeping the books, letting you know what your financial position looks like, and doing all of that required reporting to the IRS. And it's not that we report on behalf of your project, it's that your project is part of Cascadia Now. And so our full reports to the IRS include all of the projects that we are sponsoring. Another benefit, and really a big one for projects, is the ability to hire employees and to have a payroll that you don't have to manage yourself. So, for example, with Cascadia Now, if you were a fiscally sponsored project and you wanted to hire a staff member, that staff member would be a staff of Cascadia Now, and there would be already a structure in place for the employment of that staff member without you having to be responsible for paying employment taxes and doing the federal withholding and things like that. We have that payroll structure set up. Your staff are staff of Cascadia Now. So that can be a huge benefit as well. There's also a big benefit to be had in insurance. You'll find that if you apply for a general liability insurance policy independently, the cost is hugely different from just being added to another organization's insurance policy. Currently, Cascadia Now actually absorbs the cost of insurance for our projects because it is such a marginally small cost to add a project to our insurance policy. So you get that risk coverage, and we get insured with the Alliance for Nonprofit Insurance, which if you are an independent project, I would very strongly recommend you go in that direction. They are a nonprofit insuring nonprofits, and so they really understand the risks inherent in nonprofits and helping manage those risks. So that was just a little side note plug for Alliance of Nonprofit Insurance. They're also a great resource for learning more about fiscal sponsorship, actually, if you're interested from a risk management perspective. A lot of fiscal sponsors will also offer auditing services. Sometimes it means their fees are a little higher, but this means they actually come in and will look at your own workflows, how you receive and send in gifts, how your expenses work, and help you work out some of your internal systems and improve those. Also, a little more rare, but it is the case with Cascadia Now and other fiscal sponsors, that they will actually offer some programming services to help fill in some of the gaps in wherever you need a little extra help on your project. That means consulting on fundraising campaigns. It sometimes can mean helping identify grants that are a good fit. It can mean helping with event coordination, as well as graphic design or web design, or sometimes at least helping recruit volunteers that have those expertise so that they can help you really achieve and grow your project towards the goals that you're working towards. And then finally, one of the biggest benefits of fiscal sponsorship is that it can be a pathway to independent 501c3 status. So even if you really want your own 501c3 status eventually, fiscal sponsorship can be a great way to get you headed in the right direction. Because first of all, the liability of being a 501c3 remains with the sponsoring organization, Cascadia Now in our instance. If your project was adopted, we, Cascadia Now, are legally liable for ensuring that your project is compliant with 501c3 status. So that liability doesn't fall on you as an individual or your project on its own. But along the way, we can be consulting, and this is a service we offer. We can consult with you as to what steps you need to take to become a successful 501c3. We can help you navigate that 501c3 application. And we see it as a success story if we can help a project become an independent 501c3, because it definitely is a way to grow the impact of your awesome project. So that's kind of an overview of the benefits. I'm getting a question here about auditing as a service with Cascadia Now. And I'll say that right now, currently, we do not offer auditing as a service. We do all the bookkeeping for our projects, but we don't do auditing specifically. We would love to grow our staff resources in future and have even like a dedicated grant writer, a dedicated graphic designer, a dedicated financial analyst who can do audits. Those are all big goals for Cascadia Now in the future because we'd love to support projects in many different ways. But right now, we do not offer auditing as a service. But thank you for that question. The next thing I'd like to talk about are the responsibilities of fiscal sponsorship. Because as you might imagine, all of these awesome benefits don't just fall into your lap without any responsibilities. It is a two-way relationship, and hopefully a positive one, as long as everyone knows what their responsibilities are on both sides of the relationship. So first of all, like we said earlier, fiscal sponsorship is not necessarily financial sponsorship. I will say that with Cascadia Now, because we're just in the first few years, we're actually just completing our first year as a 501c3 ourselves. To help get some projects off the ground, we do have it built in our budget, a small amount to support projects with cash support. So we do have a little bit of cash support that we have and will continue to offer projects, at least in the first year of their relationship with us. But that's really rare. It's not normal or average in a fiscal sponsorship relationship for cash support to come into play. And so one of the responsibilities of a project is fundraising. In fact, it's that when you propose your annual budget to your sponsor, you'll also have to show what revenues you expect to receive to be able to cover your expenses. And those could be ticket sales to events, they could be charitable donations, they could be a grant you think you're an awesome fit for, they could be gifts from corporations. There's a lot of different kinds of revenues you can explore, of course, and it doesn't all have to be just gifts. There can be, like I said, tickets to events or even sale of merchandise, but you do have to be able to raise your own revenues. Cascadia Now and many other fiscal sponsors will be happy to help consult with you on ways to fundraise or help you identify a good grant that can help get your project off the ground. But ultimately, it is the project's responsibility to do fundraising or at least revenue raising of some kind to make sure that there are revenues coming in to cover your project expenses. All fiscal sponsors will also require some level of reporting. For Cascadia Now, for example, we ask for a quarterly report. So every 3 months, we send a template to our projects asking some questions about what they've done in the last 3 months, how many people attended their events, what progress they've made towards their goals, and how they feel about the level of support they're getting from us and how we could be more supportive. But as I mentioned, because the sponsor is responsible to the IRS for ensuring that all activities are 501c3 compliant, it means that they have to monitor the activities of all projects, and all fiscal sponsors will ask for some level of reporting back on what your activities have been so that they can then turn around and report, these are all the activities our fiscally sponsored projects have been doing, and everything's going great. We're very happy and meeting all of our goals. Another responsibility of projects is that there is some monetary support that goes back to the fiscal sponsor. Because if you think about it, the accounting and bookkeeping and reporting back to the IRS, offering services, all of these things are pretty intensive for staff time for any organization. And so it's very standard for a fiscal sponsor organization to charge an annual fee for fiscal sponsorship services, as well as a percentage of all incoming revenues. And that percentage is typically 5 to 10%. I'll tell you that currently Cascadia Now does not charge an annual fee, but we do retain 7% of all incoming revenues. So that means that any of our projects receiving a gift from an individual, ticket sales, an event, sale of merchandise, a grant, no matter what kind of revenue it is, we accept the revenue into our bank account. Of course, again, that's part of us being responsible to the IRS for ensuring that all revenues coming in are going to 501c3 purposes. So the money comes into the Cascadia Now bank account. 7%, it goes right into the Cascadia Now general operating budget to support our general operating expenses, and the remaining 93% is allocated to a fund that is restricted to the use of the project. I'll say that again, 93% we designate in a fund restricted to the use of the project. And so that means that for all intents and purposes, that 93% of revenues coming in is for your project and for nothing else. And Cascadia Now and any other fiscal sponsor will not touch that money, except for in very extreme circumstances where the project is doing something illegal or something totally different than what they said they were going to be doing, or just going way outside the 501c3 purpose. It has to be something pretty big for the fiscal sponsor to actually retract that support. But that's usually how it works. And the money does have to go in. Again, I'll say this again, the fiscal sponsor has to be in control of the finances because the IRS requires it, because we are taking responsibility for ensuring that all of that, those resources are going to 501c3 purposes. But we allocate a restricted fund for each project. Finally, one of the biggest things that you should look for in a fiscal sponsor is mission alignment. And that's something that fiscal sponsors themselves are looking for in projects as well. And along those lines, many organizations may have organizational policies that they have in place that they require all projects to abide by. For Cascadia Now, for example, we have a kindness policy, which is our version of an anti-harassment policy. We have a diversity inclusion policy, a partnership policy, and a political endorsement policy. And so all of those policies cover our fiscally sponsored projects as well. And so all of them, we make sure that they are able to review those policies and feel comfortable following them before we formalize our relationship together. And so a lot of organizations may have some kind of their own specific policies or requirements that they'll ask a project to abide by during the course of their fiscal sponsorship relationship. So that's kind of an overview of the responsibilities a project has under fiscal sponsorship. It sounds kind of daunting, but I will say that again, since the reason for fiscal sponsorship is to take a burden off of a project, that all fiscal sponsors will be willing to work with you to make sure that the logistics of the relationship are helping you reach your project's goals and not hindering you in that way. So my final thing that I want to review before I open it up for any more questions is how you can find a fiscal sponsor that's right for your project. And the number one thing that I mentioned just a moment ago is mission alignment. This is going to be important to the fiscal sponsor as well as the project. Your mission should be in line and you should have some clear values in common. For us as Cascadia Now, we want to amplify all the positive impacts of the Cascadia social movement. So cool Cascadians all over the Cascadia region doing awesome projects to promote public service, awareness of what Cascadia is and how people can be more connected to their place. And cultural celebration about all of the wonderful cultures that make up the Cascadia population. All of those projects are really in line with our mission and values, and we love to find projects like that and help them achieve their programming goals. If a project came to us that had an object that was very much outside of that, maybe they want to do some public service in Florida. And maybe they have a really awesome project and it's going to do cool things and we love it, but the focus is outside of our bioregion. And that's just not in line with our mission. It doesn't mean the project's not worthy, and it doesn't mean that we can't help them find an awesome fiscal sponsor, but it means that it's just not a good fit for Cascadia Now. So you on your end too, if you have an arts and culture project, you should find a fiscal sponsor that specializes in arts and culture projects. And there are fiscal sponsors out there like that. If you have an environmental stewardship project, you should make sure that your fiscal sponsor really has values and a culture that appreciates environment and environmental stewardship. Because at the end of the day, you're partners. You're working towards common goals. And you should be confident that your fiscal sponsor really has a mission that speaks to the goals of your project. Another thing that you should think about before you approach a fiscal sponsor is just what ways you'd like to grow. It might be that you have a brand new project and you haven't gathered any resources yet, but you have a few dedicated volunteers and you have a great idea, and what you really need is some fundraising support. Look into the services offered by different fiscal sponsorship organizations and find one that specifically says they'll offer you some fundraising support. It might not mean that they can give you money to start out, but they probably can help you run a successful fundraising campaign and get a starting balance that can help you start making a difference in your community. Um, if you're already an active project and you have some money in the bank, but you really want to grow that amount to get a staff member, or maybe you really want to work towards your own independent 501c3 status, again, just do a little research and make sure that your fiscal sponsor has services that are going to help you accomplish your goals for your project. Because that's the point of fiscal sponsorship. It's that you're a project that's independent, you don't have your own 501c3 status, but you want to benefit from 501c3 status to have a bigger positive impact in your community, in the world, in whatever context you've chosen. So make sure that you find a sponsor that's going to be able to offer services that are really relevant and helpful to your goals. At the end of this presentation and in follow-up email, you'll get a few resources, and one of them is a link to a fiscal sponsorship directory where you can go ahead and search based on a few criteria for a fiscal sponsorship organization that meets your needs, maybe is in your region, and has strong mission alignment with what you're trying to accomplish. Of course, if you're interested in learning more about fiscal sponsorship with CascadiaNow, we would love to hear from you. You can reach me at CascadiaAD@gmail.com, or if it's easier to remember, we love Cascadia@gmail.com. We'll get you to the CascadiaNow team as well. You'll also see in those links and resources we'll share afterwards that there is a book called Fiscal Sponsorship: 6 Ways to Do It Right. It's kind of the go-to handbook on fiscal sponsorship written by Gregory Colvin. And there's also a link to an online summary that does pretty good justice to that book if you want to learn a little bit more about the technical side of fiscal sponsorship and also a few other models for what fiscal sponsorship can look like. Again, we've been discussing comprehensive fiscal sponsorship today, and there are a few other kinds that don't have the same legal unity of existence between the sponsor and the project. Phew, I hope that you all have learned a lot today, and we are going to go to questions now for a minute. I see one at the top of the list. What does political endorsement mean? This is a really good question, and it actually comes up a lot with 501c3 organizations. As a 501c3, there are some limits as to what kind of political activity you can undertake. The things that are forbidden to any 501c3, you cannot support a party, a political party, or a political candidate. So you can't be pro any party, you can't be pro any candidate. However, you can do some limited activities to support or oppose legislation or ballot measures. So if your city, for example, has something on the ballot, and you see a clear reason that's for the benefit of the general public to either support or oppose that ballot measure, that is okay under 501c3. I say okay because there's limits as to how much money an organization can spend to support or oppose a ballot measure or a piece of statewide legislation. But that part of political activity is allowed. So when I mentioned CascadiaNow's political endorsement policy, what that basically says is no project or chapter of CascadiaNow or partner can support a specific candidate or party, since that is completely forbidden by the IRS anyway. And it says later on that any political activity a project wants to undertake has to have a clear connection to the well-being of the Cascadia bioregion. So political endorsement means supporting or opposing anything in the political realm for a 501c3 that cannot be support or opposition for a candidate or party, but it can be support or opposition for a ballot measure on a local level or statewide legislation. Let's see, I'm seeing another great question here. What are some of the telltale signs that an organization should look for its own 501c3 or go with a fiscal sponsor? Any metrics about cash flow, number of volunteers, number of board members, etc., that can guide decisions? This is an awesome question. And it's going to be a little tricky to answer, but I'll do my best. I would say that, especially if you're a brand new project and you have a really clear vision of what you want to accomplish, but not a very good idea of how you're going to get the resources you need, fiscal sponsorship could be great for you. And even, like I said, if you want to become a 501c3 later down the line, it's a great way to transition into making sure you understand what the responsibilities of being an independent 501c3 are, as well as what kind of activities you can and can't undertake as a 501c3. I would say that an organization that's existed for a while and already has a strong core of sometimes a board, and we've seen that too, where organizations are not 501c3s, but they still operate with a board of directors like a 501c3 would. If you have an active board, and especially if you have volunteers or board members that have a strong sense of financial management and accounting, and the administrative end of reporting and staying in compliance with 501c3 regulations. If you have that kind of human resources to really help you stay on top of your finances and reporting requirements, then 501c3, independent 501c3 status might be a great choice for you. But I'll say that for the whole spectrum between the single individual with a great project idea and the established project with many years of operating under its belt but no 501c3 status, no matter where you fall on that spectrum, fiscal sponsorship can benefit you. Because it takes some level of training and learning to understand what it takes to be compliant with 501c3. And even if you're just with a fiscal sponsor for 1 year, I see a lot of benefit to learning what kind of questions you should be able to answer to be a successful 501c3 from a compliance perspective, and what kind of reporting you'll have to do and things like that. So I would say that any level of activity or history could still benefit from a year of fiscal sponsorship. But there's also lots of resources to help you to become an independent 501c3. And so if, like I said, you're part of a project that has a long history, has a great group of supporters that are actively working on the project on a regular basis, then it might be that independent 501c3 status would make more sense for you. And of course, it means that you don't pay that admin fee to a fiscal sponsor. However, there's always a cost of bookkeeping and reporting. And so if you have someone to volunteer those hours, then it might be worth it. If you have to pay a staff member to do that, you might actually find it to be more economical to go with a fiscal sponsor than to pay someone to do that bookkeeping for you. So that was a great question. I hope that I at least got a bit to the heart of it. Thanks so much, you guys, for your awesome questions and for joining us here again today. I'll give it just a couple more minutes if anybody else has more questions. I'll say one more time that you can get in touch with Cascadia Now by emailing welovecascadia@gmail.com. I have one more question. Are all the services of a fiscal sponsor included under the 7%? With Cascadia Now, yes. We do not have different levels of service with different percentages. With each project, we develop a support plan according to the kinds of support the project has asked for. And so we work together with the project leaders to make sure they understand what kind of support they'll get from us and make sure that they're happy with that. And all of that, regardless of what the support plan looks like, we will charge that 7% fee on all incoming revenues. What you'll see, though, with a lot of other fiscal sponsors are different levels of sponsorship. For some sponsors, for example, and I'm thinking of one in particular in the greater Seattle area, they might have different percentages based on how much support you need. And so there's one that I know of, for example, where if you just want to get that 501c3 status, but you don't need any support services beyond that, then the percentage fee is less. Whereas if you need some help forming a board or conducting fundraising campaigns, or getting that other level of service, that you can sign up for a more intensive form of fiscal sponsorship, which has a higher percentage fee, but you also benefit from more services. I see a question here. I'm wondering if we as the Green Party could get fiscal sponsorship for just one small project, an exhibition on renewable energy. This is an awesome question. I'm really glad you asked it, actually. Um, yes, the short answer is yes. For any single project, you can definitely get fiscal sponsorship. And maybe I should have mentioned earlier, actually, that that's another instance in which fiscal sponsorship makes a lot of sense. If you have a one-time project that has a clear end time. So in this instance of an exhibition, maybe you plan to take a year planning it and then a year to tour around and show the exhibition, and then the project will be over. Then fiscal sponsorship makes a lot of sense, because going through the burden of becoming a 501c3 and then reporting back and making sure you keep your books and all of that becomes kind of time intensive for something that's a time limited project. So yes, that could totally be a fiscally sponsored project. I'd want to talk with you some more about the specifics of the project. One thing that might be tricky about it is that, like I mentioned, 501c3 purposes cannot support a specific political party. And so there might be some tiptoeing around how we frame the project. We have some legal advice and a great insurance broker too, so this might be a question that I'd like to take to them. There'd probably be some limitations on how we could advertise the project as far as the Green Party goes. I think that we could find non-political ways to partner with the Green Party, as long as we're not clearly supporting them in a specific election or political contest. But yes, a single project could definitely be eligible for fiscal sponsorship, and especially something that has such a clear educational purpose, like this one you mentioned, an exhibition on renewable energy. Thanks again for that question. That was a really great one. Oh, cool. Yeah, Hildegard, I would love to connect with you after this webinar and talk a little bit more. And actually, I'd like to just add something as a follow-up to the answer to that question. We've again been talking about comprehensive fiscal sponsorship. There is one other type of fiscal sponsorship that's very popular across the United States, and that's called pre-approved grant. And what that means is that rather than the project becoming a program of the fiscal sponsor, that the relationship between the sponsor and the project only exists for the duration of a certain fundraising goal. So how this might work is a project might come to CascadiaNow and say, we've identified this grant for $10,000. We really think we're a good fit for it, but we don't have 501c3 status. Will you sponsor us? We would enter into an agreement with that project whereby we say we are partners, and combined for the duration of this grant, CascadiaNow takes responsibility for ensuring that this grant will further the 501c3 purposes that it's intended to further. And then we combine forces to apply for the grant. CascadiaNow receives the grant. We keep our 7%, and the rest of the funding we distribute to the project. And it's almost like we become the grant maker's agent for making sure that that grant goes to the specified 501c3 purpose. And once that grant is fully distributed, our relationship with the project is over. And there's no more, we both part ways. Hopefully not. Hopefully we continue to partner in a positive way for positive impacts. But from a legal perspective, we would no longer be connected to the project. Similarly, the project might come to us and say, we want to raise $10,000. And we might enter into an agreement where we say, we are in this fiscal sponsorship relationship until such time as $10,000 has been raised to be dedicated to this project. And so it might not be a one-time grant. It might be just part of a grant that they apply for. It might be a big fundraising campaign and a small grant, but we enter into an agreement together whereby once that $10,000 goal is met, then the relationship ends legally and the project goes its own way. But in that instance, Cascadia Now, again, is still responsible for ensuring that all of the funding raised goes to a 501c3 purpose. So the same thing happens where all the revenues come into the Cascadia Now bank account and they get allocated to a fund for the project. And we then become responsible for distributing those funds to the project. So thanks again for that question, because it brought up another great example of fiscal sponsorship in the pre-approved grant relationship. Well, I love talking about fiscal sponsorship and budgets and reaching our 501c3 goals. So I've had a lovely time this morning, and I really appreciate you joining me. I'll give you a couple more minutes for any other questions. And I'd be very happy to address questions afterwards also. Wish you all the best for a lovely rest of your winter and however you celebrate the chilly time of year here in Cascadia.
Thanks so much, Naomi. Maybe while we're waiting for a couple more, any other questions, I'm going to put the resources up on the screen that you wanted to share. So I have those.
Thanks, Hildegarde. And thanks again for everyone's patience. I think that I'll get a new microphone for my computer before I do this again.
So here, these are the resources Naomi wanted to share with everybody about fiscal sponsorship. Pretty cool stuff, the fiscal sponsorship directory, the different types of fiscal sponsorships. Naomi talked about IRS requirements, which it sounded like a lot of, there were some questions about today, so that's good in the books on there as well. These resources will also be emailed to everybody who was registered for the webinar today. You'll have links to them, but just in case you're watching this later on YouTube, these are here so you can see them. And some of them are a lot of typing, but hopefully you'll be able to type them. So thank you so much again, Naomi, for joining us today and for telling us all about fiscal sponsorship. Like you said, you love to talk about it. We could tell. So thank you. Connecting with the bioregion is a huge part of what the Cascadia Now mission is, cultivating a resilient and inclusive Pacific Northwest community. So your questions or comments are welcome anytime. You can connect with us by email. Naomi said some of those emails, but we love Cascadia at Gmail is the best one. Any favorite social media channel, if you're watching this on YouTube, we're happy to see your comments or questions here. You can visit our website at CascadiaNow.org anytime and reach out as well. So thank you all so much for attending. Like I said before, you're going to get an email with the link to the replay video. The video is available on the YouTube channel. We have more exciting Cascadia Now webinars coming up. On January 12th, we'll have a conversation with Cascadia Now Outreach Manager, Andrew, who's going to do a Cascadia Ambassador training for us. And then on February 4th, Washington State University Extension Forestry Program Coordinator Lauren Grand will be teaching us about the common lower elevation trees of Washington. So be sure you don't miss out on those fun upcoming events. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much, Naomi. And we look forward to seeing you again at Cascadia Speaks. Have a great day.